This podfic contains content that may be disturbing for some viewers, including mentions of violence, guns, and physical and emotional abuse. Please check out the complete list of content warnings in the description, and proceed with caution if you are sensitive to these topics.
Hello, my lovely little gemstones, it's Afira, and today I'll be reading When the Chips Are Down by Whiskey with Patron. Chapter 12. I'm very gay. I'd like a few Pop-Tarts. Virgil woke to someone knocking on his door. His eyes snapped open and he sat up in bed. Dad never woke him up by knocking on his door. Why was he doing it now? He squinted in the bright light of the room. His heart skipped a beat when he realized he wasn't at home. Where the hell was he? Then the events of the previous day came rushing back. He covered his eyes with a grunt of displeasure. Right. He'd left the lights on because he didn't want to sleep in the dark, and he didn't have a nightlight. In hindsight, maybe he should have put one in his backpack before he left the house. He slowly uncovered his eyes as they adjusted. Another knock on the door hit his eardrums and he shrunk back at the sound. "Virgil," said a voice, "DW and I have to work at 9, and we need to take you and your brothers with us. Are you awake, at least?" Virgil grabbed a pillow off his bed and threw it at the door in response. He didn't want to talk. Luckily, Mr. Chimera seemed to see this as an acceptable answer. "I'll see you downstairs in the kitchen if you want breakfast." Virgil grabbed Miss Snuffles and hugged her to his chest. He didn't want to leave the room, but the lights were too bright, and he couldn't think straight. He grabbed his sweater off the floor and tugged it on, still clutching Miss Snuffles. He shouldn't take her outside the room with him. He was 15. He shouldn't need a stuffed animal anymore. A disappointed noise left his throat as he put Miss Snuffles back on the bed. He grabbed his bat necklace and put it over his head. He had a feeling this was going to be a difficult day. He put his hood up and shut off the light as he left the room. The hardly touched plate of lasagna Mr. Chimera had left there the night before wasn't there anymore. Virgil had tried the food, but he couldn't make himself eat much. It didn't taste familiar. It wasn't the same as the food Dad made. That wasn't to say it wasn't good, but it just wasn't right. It was still early, so the sun wasn't even up yet. A faint orange glow from the sunrise shook through the walls, but it felt bright as a spotlight to Virgil's sensitive eyes. He hunched into his sweater and hurried down the hall towards the stairwell. He trudged down the stairs, hands in his pockets to keep himself from fidgeting. He didn't want to know what Mr. Chimera's reaction would be to Virgil's weird habits. Virgil opened the door to the dining room and stepped through. He shut it behind him and started across the room, but he skittered to a stop when he saw someone sitting at the dining table. He blinked in surprise as he took in the sight of the person. Dark brown hair, glasses, black polo shirt with a blue tie. "Mr. Minder?" Virgil whispered. Mr. Minder looked up from his cup of coffee he had sitting in front of him. "Oh, hello, Virgil. Are you feeling all right this morning?" Virgil couldn't come up with an answer through his confusion. "What are you doing here?" Mr. Minder shrugged and sipped his coffee. "Just the usual business. I got shot and decided to see if Janus Chimera could help." Virgil just stared at him. You got shot?" Mr. Minder nodded. "Yes. I suppose I should explain. I assumed you would be confused once you saw me here. You see, the door across the room swung open. Mr. Chimera walked in, dressed in the same suit he wore the day before, bowler hat and yellow gloves included. He held a cup of hot chocolate in his hands. He set the cup down on the table next to Mr. Minder and leaned against the table. Virgil's eyebrows shot up in surprise when Mr. Chimera cupped Mr. Minder's face with one hand. "Logan, darling, are you feeling better this morning?" Mr. Chimera asked. His tone was soft and laced with affection. "Yes, I am, thank you." Mr. Minder took another sip of coffee. His tone was as cold and flat as ever, but a red flush had appeared on his cheeks. DW did a phenomenal job with the stitches, as usual. Mr. Chimera leaned down and placed a kiss on Mr. Minder's forehead. Virgil gagged internally at the display of affection. "That's good." Mr. Chimera looked up and jumped a little when he saw Virgil. "Oh, Virgil, how long have you been there?" "Is this how other kids feel when their parents get all gross with each other?" was Virgil's only response. "I don't see how that comparison applies to us," Mr. Minder said. "Janus and I are not your parents." "You're my teacher," Virgil said. "Close enough." He speed-walked across the room. "Chimera, you got any Pop-Tarts in your kitchen?" "We should have some in the pantry," Mr. Chimera said. "Help yourself." Virgil shouldered the door open and crossed the hall to the kitchen. He wanted to know why Mr. Minder was here, but since he hardly ate anything yesterday, he was hungry. The issue with Mr. Minder could wait until later. Virgil entered the kitchen and his eyes widened. This was probably the biggest kitchen he'd ever seen in his life. The counter to the right spanned almost the entire length of the wall, interrupted in the middle by the stove. A door stood on the far end of it, leading to what he presumed was the pantry. Dozens of cupboards stuck out of the wall above the counter. An island with chairs pushed up to it took up the middle of the room, and at the left wall was a bar with shelves of bottles and glasses behind it. Virgil stepped past the island on his way to the pantry. This would certainly take some getting used to. He opened the pantry door. He scanned the shelves. They were filled with unopened packages of various pasta noodles, bags of flour and sugar, bottles of sauces, bags of chips. God, was there even an organizing system for all this? He felt the need to start taking things off shelves and putting them all in specific places. Seriously, what were the Doritos doing on the top shelf with the canned fruit? He shook his head and just kept searching for the Pop-Tarts. He pushed aside a box of Kraft Dinner. He liked Kraft Dinner. Maybe he could ask Mr. Chimera later if he could make some for lunch, and spotted the bright blue box he wanted. He grabbed the Pop-Tarts and flipped the box open. Thank fuck they were strawberry flavored. If this guy had Jolly Rancher flavored Pop-Tarts, Virgil would have packed up his stuff and left the house immediately. He put 2 in the toaster and waited for them to toast. There was no one else in the kitchen, so after a hesitant glance at the door, he hopped up onto the island and sat there. Sure, there were chairs, but chairs were for people who were either straight or cowards, and Virgil was neither. He swung his legs off the edge of the counter. After a moment's hesitation, he started clicking his tongue against the roof of his mouth. No one could hear or see him right now, so maybe letting himself engage in his weird habits, stimming, Mr. Minder called it, whatever that meant, was fine for now. He let his sweater sleeves fall over his hands and flapped them up and down as he waited for his Pop-Tarts to be done, still clicking his tongue. He felt a lot better now that he got to fidget. The door swung open and he stopped moving and making sounds. He glanced back to see who had entered the kitchen. Mr. Chimera walked in, cup of hot chocolate in hand. He set it on the island. He didn't even give Virgil a second glance, which Virgil thought was strange considering he was sitting stock still on the island with his hands frozen mid-flap. Virgil lowered his hands and hunched over in his seat as Mr. Chimera walked to the fridge. Maybe he wasn't saying anything to Virgil because he thought Virgil was weird. He was probably judging Virgil for behaving so strangely. Virgil slid off the island and stood, facing the toaster, hands jammed in his pockets to keep them still. Mr. Chimera rifled around in the fridge and emerged with a jar of jam in his hand. He opened the drawer in the counter and grabbed a butter knife. Nudging the drawer shut with his hip, he unscrewed the lid of the jar. Virgil watched as Janus grabbed a plate from the cupboard, then reached into the bag of bread on the counter. Virgil wanted to keep fidgeting or stimming or whatever it was called, but he didn't want to weird out Mr. Chimera. "I like your necklace, Virgil," Mr. Chimera commented as he scooped up some jam with his knife. "It matches your pajamas." Virgil glanced down. He'd forgotten he was wearing his pajama pants with the bats printed on them. "Thanks," he muttered. Maybe Janus wasn't judging him for anything. Maybe Virgil had just read the room wrong. It wouldn't be the first time that happened. Janus spread the jam onto the slice of bread he'd taken. "That is a chewable pendant, am I correct?" Virgil didn't respond at first. He didn't quite know how. What if he said yes and Mr. Chimera started thinking he was weird? Or if he said no, he might just think Virgil was lying. "Yeah," he said finally. Mr. Chimera nodded. "Well, it's a very cute necklace. If you ever chew through it, let me know and I can get you a new one. I have a few fidget cubes you can borrow as well, if you want." Virgil stared as Mr. Chimera finished with the jam and screwed the lid back on. "Lovely chat," Mr. Chimera said, "but I need to get some food to your teacher. He shouldn't have even come downstairs, but the man is stubborn." He picked up the plate and walked back to the dining room. Virgil blinked. Did Mr. Chimera know about Virgil's fidgeting? Was that a roundabout way of saying he was okay with it? The toaster popped. Virgil yelped. He'd nearly forgotten he had breakfast in the toaster. Virgil stuck his bat pendant in his mouth. He grabbed a butter knife and tried to stab the Pop-Tarts to get them out. He was never going to figure Mr. Chimera out, was he? He put his Pop-Tarts on a plate and spat out his necklace to bite into one. He severely underestimated how hot the strawberry filling would be, so he resorted to chewing with his mouth open and frantically inhaling to cool it down. He walked across the kitchen to the door, tossing the Pop-Tart back onto his plate to let it cool. He nudged the door open and crossed the hall to go to the dining room, but he paused when he heard Mr. Chimera and Mr. Minder speaking. "So," Mr. Chimera's voice said, "now that you're awake and not in danger of dying, would you care to explain exactly how you ended up in this mess?" Mr. Minder sighed. "Must we do this now, Janus? It is quite early in the morning." "It's just past 8. You usually get up at 6. It's not early for you." A brief pause. Virgil stepped closer to the door to hear better. "It is a little complicated," Mr. Minder responded. "We have about half an hour before I leave for work," Mr. Chimera said. "That should be ample time to explain." Mr. Minder sighed. "Look, I was just doing a quick hacking job. Another gang caught me and got upset enough to teach me a lesson about poking into their business. Besides, the bullet only grazed my side. It didn't actually hit me." Virgil couldn't see what was happening in the dining room through the door, but he assumed Mr. Chimera gave Mr. Minder some sort of disapproving look. "Fine," Mr. Minder said. "I was trying to see where Patton had gone." Virgil's breath caught in his throat. Mr. Minder was looking for Dad? "Yes. How do you know Patton Hart?" Mr. Chimera asked. "I've been wondering that ever since I saw your name and phone number on the letter he left for me." "Well, how do you know him?" Mr. Minder shot back. "Why are his children here?" "I've been asking you questions first. You answer my questions and I'll answer yours." "You are as stubborn as ever." "So are you, darling." Mr. Minder sighed. "Okay. I know Patton because we went to school together. I may or may not have been aware of his general situation with Rath's blade. He didn't want his kids to go to public school for fear that Rath might find them, so he asked me to tutor them as well. Patton texted me yesterday to cancel their tutoring session, and I got curious. I looked into some things to see if Rath had found him." "And have they?" "Not that I could see. I've been putting out some requests with some unaffiliated sources to see if anyone knows where he is. I'm not expecting any responses, but I just want to know if he's all right. Unfortunately, there seems to be a bounty on his head." "A bounty?" Mr. Chimera mumbled. "What did he do to warrant such a widespread search?" "That is Patton's business," Mr. Chimera said. "How many people are aware of the bounty?" "Nearly every bounty hunter in the country," Mr. Minder said. "However, I'm sure Patton and his friend can manage to stay safe. Remy Dormier is a very capable man, if a little eccentric." Mr. Chimera hummed. "Yes, I'm aware of Remy's capabilities. I hope he can protect Patton, but knowing Patton, he won't need the protection." "Okay," said Mr. Minder. "And now you. How do you know Patton?" There was a brief pause before Mr. Chimera spoke. "Well, my situation with Patton is also a little complicated. We haven't spoken in years, really, but I owed him a favor since he did something for me long ago, and he's decided to use that favor to keep his children safe while he's running from Rath." "So you're in charge of taking care of the kids," Mr. Minder scoffed. "Good luck with that. You know nothing about children." "Well, Patton did tell me to contact you if I need assistance. Now that you're here—" "No," Mr. Minder interrupted. "I will continue to tutor the children, but I am not equipped for physically taking care of them. I know some general things if you need advice, however. I am their counselor as well as their teacher." Mr. Chimera snorted. "You are a counselor? Darling, you don't even have feelings." "You're right about that." He paused. "Virgil," he called. "You can come out now." Virgil's heart leapt into his throat. How did Mr. Minder know he was there? He slowly opened the door and peeked out at the two of them, bracing himself for a scolding. Mr. Minder just sat in his chair with a smug smirk on his face, and Mr. Chimera was sitting on the table, staring at Virgil with a surprised expression. "Sorry," Virgil said automatically. "How did you know he was listening?" Mr. Chimera asked. "Kids want to know things they shouldn't," Mr. Minder said with a shrug. Virgil hunched over in his hoodie. They were probably mad at him for listening. He knew eavesdropping was bad, but he just wanted to know what they were talking about. "We're not upset with you," Mr. Minder said, as if he knew exactly what Virgil was thinking. He took a sip of his coffee. "You're actually quite good at eavesdropping. I didn't even notice you were there for a while. That's a skill you'll want to hang on to." Mr. Chimera nodded. "Yes, that can be useful." He stood and cleared his throat. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to get ready for work." He leaned down and planted a kiss to Mr. Minder's forehead before walking to the door that led to the stairs. He disappeared into the stairwell. The door swung shut behind him. Virgil stood in the doorway with his Pop-Tarts, hesitant to take a seat at the table after that awkward exchange. However, Mr. Minder seemed preoccupied with eating the jam-covered bread Mr. Chimera had brought him. Maybe he wouldn't care if Virgil sat down. Virgil walked to the table and lowered himself into one of the chairs. He took a bite of his Pop-Tart, keeping his gaze on the table. He sat on his other hand to keep it still. Quiet hands, he reminded himself. Virgil looked up at Mr. Minder, who was staring at him across the table. Had he done something wrong? Was he not supposed to sit down at the table? "You are allowed to stim," Mr. Minder said. "There is no need to restrain yourself. I guarantee you that Mr. Chimera doesn't mind, and neither does DW. No one will judge you for it, Janus least of all. You're free to be yourself here." Virgil was a little reluctant, but he brought his free hand off his seat and used it to twirl his necklace in his fingers. He did feel a little better fidgeting, but he was still afraid he would weird someone out with his habits. Mr. Minder never seemed to mind, though. Virgil let himself play with his bat pendant as he took another bite of his Pop-Tart. "I get the feeling you have some questions, Virgil," Mr. Minder said. "You're free to ask. I don't know what Janus has told you already, but you deserve to at least know why you're here and why Patton has left." Mr. Minder was right. Virgil did have questions. He hadn't asked Mr. Chimera or DW because he didn't know if they would answer, but Mr. Minder was usually honest with him. Plus, he was tired of being clueless. "I just don't know what's going on," Virgil admitted. "I don't know what Chimera really is. It's obviously not just a bank. And I don't know what Wrath is, or what's with the bounty hunters you mentioned, or anything, really. What's going on?" Mr. Minder gulped down some coffee and set down his mug. "Well, Janus is not only in charge of the banking branch under the name of Chimera. The bank is just a cover for everything else that Chimera does." "What do they do?" "Many things. Smuggling drugs and weapons, helping people illegally cross borders, handing out loans to anyone who needs extra money, and inevitably tracking down those who don't pay back their loans. The list goes on." Virgil blinked as that information sank in. He knew this whole thing was shady. He knew Mr. Chimera was involved in illegal shit. "I am a hacker affiliated with Chimera, although Chimera is not the only organization I have lent my services to," Mr. Minder said. "I work very closely with Janus, if you hadn't noticed already." "Yeah, I figured," Virgil mumbled. "But what's Dad doing? Why is he involved in all this?" "Honestly, Virgil, I don't know how Patton originally ended up in this mess. I believe Janus knows, but that issue might be held between him and Patton. All I know is that he got caught up in another organization, one that goes by the name of Wrath's Blade, and now his past is coming back to figuratively bite him in the ass." "Is Wrath's Blade bad? What are they going to do if they find him?" Mr. Minder didn't respond for a moment, which didn't help to ease Virgil's nerves. "I don't know," he admitted finally. "Wrath isn't exactly friendly, if the name is any indication. They seem to have looser morals than most of Chimera. For example, they deal in human trafficking, or at least have frequently in the past, though they've slowed down with that as of late." A hint of disdain made its way into his voice. "Part of why Chimera is on bad terms with them is because we often try to protect their targets. We are willing to let them take over the drug trafficking industry in this area if they stop their human trafficking, but the money they see in that business must be too much for them to pass up. We have had partnerships with Wrath in the past, but the figurative line between business deals and all-out brawling is a thin one when it comes to our relationship with Wrath. Nevertheless, Patton sent you to Chimera because Janus has the means to protect you and your brothers. Wrath won't even know you're here while you're under Janus's protection." Virgil took another bite of his Pop-Tart as that information sank in. That was a lot to process. Some of it made sense, but everything Mr. Minder just told him caused his anxiety to shoot up a little. This weird rival gang or whatever that was involved in human trafficking was going after Dad? And Janus Chimera was the only one who could protect them? Was he serious? "Everything's going to be all right, Virgil," Mr. Minder said. "Janus will keep you and your brothers safe, and I will continue to search for your father to the best of my ability. I will contact as many people as I can to help me find out where your father is, and offer him support while he's on the run." Mr. Minder offered him a smile, something that was rare coming from him. The sight actually calmed Virgil's nerves a bit. He took a deep breath. "Thanks for telling me," he said. "I don't understand all of that, but I think I get the gist." "You're welcome." Virgil stood and picked up his plate. "I think I'm gonna go finish my breakfast in my room. I'm still getting used to all this." "That's a good idea. If you need softer lights in your room, don't hesitate to ask. I'll keep that in mind." Virgil walked to the door that led to the stairs. Before he left the dining room, he shot one last glance back at Mr. Minder. He held his cup of coffee in one hand, blue eyes fixed on the table as if deep in thought. Virgil would have loved to know what was going on in that mind of his. He opened the door and started up the stairs, leaving Mr. Minder to his thoughts. Chapter 13. Gosh dang it, there's a bounty hunter in the house. Patton woke feeling a little drowsy. He'd slept all right, but not nearly enough to make up for the stuff that happened the day before. Remy's arms were still wrapped around him, and Patton decided that since Remy wasn't up yet, he didn't need to get up either. He kept his eyes shut and snuggled further under the covers with a sigh. Remy grunted in his sleep at the movement and tightened his hug. He pressed himself close to Patton, and they lied there in bed, legs tangled together. Click. Patton snatched the knife from under his pillow and lunged to his feet before his eyes were open. He knocked the gun out of the hand of the person who had entered their room and held his knife up to their neck. Remy was right behind him, bolting awake as soon as Patton was out of bed. He cocked his own gun and aimed it at the person, still perched on the bed. Patton squinted, trying to focus on the person in front of him. They were more of a blurry mess without his glasses, so he kept his knife on their neck and reached back to grab his glasses from the nightstand. He slid them on and turned back to the person. The first thing he noticed was the person's bright red hair, and that wasn't to say she was ginger. Her hair was dyed a blazing red, with dark roots poking out of her scalp. She wore a spotless white jacket. He ran her face through his memory. He couldn't remember seeing her in person before. He didn't know if she was a new agent of Wrath's or if she was an unaffiliated assassin. "Who are you?" Remy snapped. The person narrowed her eyes at him. "That's none of your business." "I think it is our business," Remy said, "considering you broke into this house to shoot us." "Look, I really don't want to hurt you," Patton said, "but he will shoot you if you don't leave or tell us who you are and who sent you." The person glanced from Remy to Patton, probably weighing her options. She sighed. "No one sent me. I came here on my own." "And your name?" Remy asked. She narrowed her eyes at him. He glared right back. Patton's left pointer finger twitched. Footsteps sprinted down the hallway outside their room. Patton whipped his head around to look just as Andy threw their door open. Her gray flannel pajamas and baggy t-shirt were rumpled, and her hair stuck up in a dozen different directions. Her eyes were wide. She clutched her open laptop in one hand. "Guys," she said, "there's someone in the—" Her sentence halted as soon as she saw the redhead in the room. "Oh, I guess you already know that." "You're a little late to the party," Remy said. He hadn't taken his eyes off the redhead. "Now, your name?" "No need to question her," Andy said. "That's Price Princeton. She's a bounty hunter." Remy's eyebrows shot up. "Bounty? Hunter?" Patton squeaked. "The hunter part isn't what's concerning here, Pat," Remy said. "There's a bounty on us?" Price glared daggers at Remy. "Not you. Him." She looked pointedly at Patton. Patton's heart sank into his gut. "Who set the bounty?" "Who do you think?" Price snapped. "Wrath wants you. Of course they might spread the word to a few unaffiliated assassins that you're on their shit list." "And how did you find us?" Remy demanded. Price scoffed. "Hot tip. If you're on the run, don't use a debit card to pay for your shit when you shop. It leaves a paper trail." "That's what I was thinking," Patton mumbled. Louder, he said, "If you managed to find us, do you know if Wrath has found us yet?" Price rolled her eyes. "They haven't. Now, can you get that knife off my neck?" "Why? Is it putting you on edge?" Remy lowered his gun. "Pat, now is not the time for knife jokes." "Right, sorry." Patton lowered the knife. Andy furiously typed on her laptop. "Well, I sure fucking hope Wrath hasn't managed to find us. Princeton, I swear to God, if you led them here—" "Relax. The idiots are too stupid to find you themselves," Price said, one hand on her throat to rub at the spot Patton's knife had been pressed to. "They're searching in groups now. They can't move fast enough to find you when they're all clustered together." Remy's grip tightened on his gun. "But when they do find us, they'll be able to take us easier. We won't be able to fight them if there's more than one." "And that's why they hired bounty hunters," Patton whispered. If Wrath's blade hired bounty hunters to track them down, there was no way they weren't tracking the hunters. Despite Andy's extra measures to keep them from being tracked to Thomas's house, Price's signal would have been cut off somewhere in this area, and it wouldn't take much to narrow down the search. Price sighed. "Look, I didn't think I was dealing with people who knew they were being followed. I only take easy jobs. Now either come with me to Wrath quietly, so I don't have to do any work, or let me leave and take another job." "Quiet, Princey," Andy grumbled, still typing. "How many assassins and hunters did they send the bounty out to?" "Pretty much everyone who isn't affiliated with a specific gang," Price said. She held up a hand to examine her nails. Andy stopped typing and stared wide-eyed at her screen. "Holy shit, that's a lot of money. And you're wanted alive. We're gonna have every single assassin and bounty hunter in the Northern Hemisphere on our ass." Remy hopped off the bed and rushed to his pile of stuff. "Pat, get dressed. We're leaving." Patton hurriedly pulled on his cat hoodie as Remy tugged on a pair of jeans. "Oh, wait, you're leaving?" Andy said. "We have to," Patton said. "You and Thomas are going to be in danger if we stay." He grabbed his denim jacket and put it on over his hoodie. "We're not letting that happen." Well, you're not going to get very far without help. Andy shut her laptop. I'm coming too. No, you're not. Remy slid his arms through the sleeves of his leather jacket. You're staying here, where you're more or less safe. Come on, you need some technological help to block your trail, and that motorbike probably won't even get you across the city without being recognized. Thomas can drive us in his car. You're taking us with you. No, Patton insisted. He pulled on a pair of jeans. We're not. You and Thomas need to stay here. Remy, however, had paused in the middle of putting on his sunglasses. Pat, we do need help. Patton whirled on him, feeling almost betrayed. Remy, we can't put them in danger. I've already dragged you into this mess. I don't need 2 more people in danger because of me. Look, Price said, whatever you losers decide, I gotta go, so... Remy grabbed her shoulder. No. You know where we are. You're coming with us. We're not letting you give us away to Wrath. Price raised a finely plucked eyebrow. What? No, I'm just a bounty hunter. I know nothing. You don't need to... Remy picked up his gun. It wasn't a question. Price glanced from Patton to Remy to the gun. Damn, you guys are testy. Andy turned and left the room. I'll get Thomas. Patton wanted to call out after her, but she was gone by the time he turned to face her. He wanted to scream in frustration. Great, now he was dragging 3 more people along in this dangerous ride he was stuck on. This was the opposite of what he wanted. He left the city to get away from people he might drag down with him, and now there were more people involving himself in his problem. Patton slung his backpack onto his shoulders. Remy, I don't think letting them come with us is a good idea. Remy grabbed his satchel and put it over his shoulder. We need help. If we're being tracked down by Wrath and every bounty hunter in Southern America, we can't get out of this alone. Patton watched helplessly as Remy guided Price out of the room at gunpoint. All of these people were going to get dragged down by Patton's issues. However, he just followed them out of the bedroom. He jogged down the stairs to the living room, clutching the straps of his backpack. As they neared the first floor, he heard a pair of voices arguing back and forth. What do you mean you already knew they were coming? Andy said. I mean, I was up all night watching Parks and Rec while keeping watch, and I saw people sneaking around outside earlier this morning. I filled up the car. It's ready to go. Patton emerged in the living room to see Thomas, already dressed and rummaging through the kitchen as he shoved things into a backpack. Andy stood in the living room, staring at him in wonder. Thomas looked up as the others stepped off the stairs. His eyes fell on Price. Were you the one hiding in my bushes? He asked. Price blinked. You saw me? Wait, who even are you? No time for introductions, Remy said. Thomas, babe, we need to go. Nice jacket, by the way. Thomas zipped up his bag and put it on over his red leather jacket. Thanks. Anyway, I'm about 99% certain that some people from Wrath managed to track someone here. There's a car down the road full of people, and there are a couple people on the rooftops keeping watch of the street. They just got here. Andy, go open the garage door. Andy shoved her laptop into a bag leaning against the couch. You got it. She hung the bag on her shoulder and rushed off. Patton blinked at Thomas. You're going to help us? Well, yeah. You're not the first people who had to run away in a hurry. I don't usually go with the people I help, but I don't trust Wrath as far as I can throw them. I could be a danger if I stay. Leaving is the safest thing to do. Thomas turned to Remy. Get the bounty hunter in the car. We gotta leave your bike behind for now. Fine. Remy guided Price to the front door. Come on, Princey. Don't call me that. Price grumbled, but she trudged forward with Remy's gun to her back. Thomas took a deep breath. You ready, Patton? Patton hesitated. He didn't want to let everyone else put themselves at risk for him. But Thomas and everyone else already seemed committed to going. No matter how hard he tried, he was pretty sure he wouldn't be able to convince them to stay here. Yeah, he said. Let's go. Chapter 14. I had to pick today to try ignoring my anxiety. Janus leaned down to give Logan a kiss on the forehead. You're sure you'll be all right on your own, darling? Logan sighed at Janus's concern, but he nodded. I'm perfectly fine, Janus. You don't have to worry. I know, honey, but you can't blame me. You were shot, after all. The bullet only grazed my side. I told you that. Logan grimaced as he shifted in his seat on the couch. If it had actually hit me, there would be cause for concern. Janus hesitated, but he finally relented. Okay, we'll be back in the afternoon so you can teach the kids. Logan gave him a smile. See you then. He reached up and grabbed Janus's tie, gently tugging him down to kiss Janus. Janus found himself smiling into Logan's lips. Someone smacked the back of Janus's head, almost taking off his hat. Come on, lovebirds, DW said. Janus reluctantly made to pull away, but Logan pressed his lips to the corner of Janus's mouth. You could just stay here, he suggested quietly, a smirk on his face. Virgil gagged at the display of affection. Janus pecked Logan on the cheek and straightened, Logan's hands slipping off Janus's tie and resting back on the keys of his laptop. Sorry, darling. Call me if you need me. We won't be too long. Keep an eye on the security cameras for me. Will do. Logan leaned back into the couch and turned to the screen in front of him. DW started for the door, keys in hand. Come on, kiddos. Janus saw Virgil visibly wince at her words. Roman and Remus, however, didn't seem bothered in the slightest. They smiled and waved at Logan, and he waved back. See you, Lo, DW said. She guided the twins to the door. The two kids ran to the door with identical smiles. They seemed to adjust very quickly to the new environment and situation. Either that, or they were trying to focus on the positives, exploring a new house, being around new people. It must have been exciting for a couple of 11-year-olds to be in such a big house and interact with more people. Janus started for the door. Stay safe, darling. I'll try, Logan said. Janus reached the door and glanced back at Virgil. Are you coming? Virgil stood in the living room, backpack on his shoulders. Janus didn't question why he was bringing his bag. The kid looked anxious enough. Virgil brought the pendant of his necklace up to his mouth and shrugged. He waved at Logan and hurried to the door. Logan waved back. Janus held the door open for Virgil. He rushed out of the house, hands clutching the straps of his backpack, shoulders hunched over. Janus blew a kiss in Logan's direction, before following Virgil out the door. He caught Logan smiling at the gesture as Janus closed the door. Janus locked the door behind him. Dorothy, did you double-check the security system? Yep, DW called from the car. She put her briefcase in the trunk as Rowan and Remus clambered into the back seat. Logan turned everything off last night so we could get onto the balcony. I reset the whole system last night and gave him unrestricted access. Good. Janus strode to the trunk and set his own briefcase in next to DW's. He shut the trunk and walked around to the passenger side door. Here's hoping Maggie didn't set the office on fire in the 2 hours she's been in charge for. DW snorted as she started the car. No kidding. She glanced into the back seat. You kids ready? Janus followed her gaze. Roman and Remus seemed fine, although Remus was rolling his window up and down over and over again. Virgil was hunched over in his seat and sitting on his hands, completely still. Janus didn't think anything of it. He often forced himself to stay still as well. It wasn't fun, but masking wasn't fun even at the best of times. DW backed out of the driveway and pulled onto the street. Janus glanced in the rearview mirror to straighten his hat and his tie. He was sure he wouldn't get much work done when they were in the office. Maggie might have already made a mess of things. He trusted her, but she was very eccentric. It was possible that no one was getting anything done, and Maggie had started braiding other employees' hair in the staff room. It didn't take long to arrive at their destination. Janus stepped out of the car and opened the door to the back seat for Virgil. Virgil hopped out, clutching his backpack straps. Roman and Remus scurried out past him, and Janus shut the door. DW locked the car and grabbed a briefcase from the trunk, and Janus took his. They walked across the parking lot to the front of the bank. Janus held the door open for the others and let them file in. Once they were inside, he turned and scanned the street around them for any signs of anyone from Wrath. He didn't see anyone wearing anything predominantly orange, so he hoped Wrath was still oblivious to Patton's children staying with Chimera. He shut the door behind him as he stepped into the building. Roman and Remus were standing at the line of ATMs, pressing the buttons on one of them and giggling. Virgil was trying to tug them away as DW talked to one of the tellers behind the counter. Janus approached the counter. Is anything the matter? The teller sighed and pushed her glasses up her nose. There are a few hostages throwing a fit downstairs. They're just being a little hard to handle. Miss Saylor doesn't know whether to take some people off guard duty to protect them and isolate the hostages until they stop, or if we should pull some of the hitmen and postpone some assassinations so they can get control over the situation. Janus echoed her sigh. The minute he decided to put someone in charge, everything went to shit. How many hostages are running loose? He asked. All of them, the teller answered. She straightened her blue necktie. About 20. The hostages overwhelmed their guards and stole some weapons, and are now keeping them hostage. Not many of them are actively participating in this riot, only about 4 of them. But the hostile ones have shut themselves up with the rest of their fellow hostages. They're still on the 7th floor down. Janus' grip tightened on the handle of his briefcase. This was going to be a tricky situation to solve, but he was sure he could figure something out. He turned to look at the line of ATMs. Kids, we need to go. Stop playing with the machines, please. Roman's shoulders slumped in disappointment, but he followed Virgil to the counter. Remus pressed one of the buttons on the ATM a few more times before he ran after his brothers. Thank you for letting us know, Teal, Janus said to the bank teller. Teal nodded. You're welcome, she said. By the way, have you heard from my brother lately? I couldn't contact him last night. He showed up on my balcony. Don't worry, he's fine. I'll tell him to call you later. Thanks, Mr. Chimera. Janus and DW walked behind the counter, the 3 kids in tow. They stopped in front of the elevator and DW pressed the button. Janus's mind raced as they waited for the doors to open. How was he going to solve this issue? The doors opened and they stepped into the elevator. DW, Janus said as soon as the doors shut, I'm going to need you to stay in your office with the kids. I'll visit the 7th floor myself and see if I can sort things out. DW raised an eyebrow. Are you sure? Oh, absolutely not, Dorothy. It's not like I'm actually capable of defending myself if anything goes wrong. Well, if you're sure, just don't die. You don't know how feral these hostages are. Virgil's head whipped around to stare at the 2 of them. Janus tried not to look at him directly. It was possible that Virgil already knew about Janus's less than legal business practices, but he didn't want to concern the kid by trying to explain any of it to him. The elevator doors opened, and the 5 of them entered the hallway beyond. Where's Maggie's office again? Janus asked. Hall to the left, DW answered. Door with the Sailor Moon poster on it. Thank you. Janus veered to the left. Kids, stay with DW. I'll be back in a few. What are you doing? Janus paused and turned to look at Virgil. Just going to deal with some business. Don't worry about it. He entered the hall to the left and scanned the doors on either side. Sure enough, he spotted one with a big anime poster plastered to the front. The name Moggy Sailor was stuck on the door in sparkly purple letters. He wondered why he let her use those stickers to put her name on the door. If she ever moved out, it would take some serious elbow grease to scrub those stickers off. He knocked on the door. Miss Sailor? Footsteps thudded on the floor inside the room, and the door swung open. Moggy stood in the doorway, looking absolutely exhausted. Her long purple hair was pulled into a ponytail rather than its usual pigtails, and it also lacked the white headband she often wore. She managed to put on a light dusting of purple eyeshadow and some mascara to help cover up the slight bags under her eyes. She wore black leggings instead of her purple skirt, and her clothes were rumpled as if she'd just rolled out of bed. Hey, Jan, she sighed. You're here because of the riding hostages. Yes, Janus said. What happened? Moggy stepped aside and opened her door to let him in. He stepped into the room, gaze flickering over the dozens of anime posters plastered on the wall. Moggy walked over to the desk in the corner of the room and flopped into the chair. Sorry, Jan. I thought I could handle it. I don't even know what happened. I was sending some people out to Texas to deal with some drug trades, and the next thing I hear is someone bursting into my office shouting about hostages trying to escape. I've pulled some people off guard duty so they don't get overwhelmed by all the violence. Teal said some of the hostages were holding some of the agents on the 7th floor. Yeah, 4 of the hostages have weapons now. I don't know what to do. I'm sorry. It's all right, Moggy, Janus assured her. This likely would have happened even if I hadn't left you in charge. It's not your fault, but I'd like you to take me down to the 7th floor to examine the situation. Moggy stood and smoothed out her jacket. Sure. They left the room and Janus followed Moggy down the hall towards the elevator. They haven't taken the entire 7th floor, Moggy said as they walked. They've isolated themselves to the southern living room and are shooting at anyone who comes close. She lifted the hem of her jacket to rest her hand on a pistol in her belt. You got a gun? In my briefcase, Janus said. He pressed a button on the elevator and the doors opened. They both stepped in, and Janus pressed the button with the 7 on it. His heart pounded in his chest as the elevator went down. If he couldn't gain control over the situation, who knew what would happen? The elevator stopped and the doors opened. Janus poked his head out and glanced from side to side. When no one shot at him and Moggy left the elevator. The hallway they were in seemed to be clear of people. Janus quickly flipped open his briefcase and grabbed the small pistol he'd packed along with all of his important files and documents. He shut the case and set it next to the elevator. It's too quiet down here. Normally he loved silence, but this floor was always bustling with hostages going about their days, waiting for their loved ones to start making payments towards the debts that got them kidnapped in the first place. Most hostages were released after only a few days or even a few hours, but there were a couple who had been here over a month. Janus assumed the ones who had been here longer had gotten fed up with being here and convinced the new ones to attempt an escape. There was one particular hostage that he was sure was the ringleader of this little riot. You said they're in the South Hall? Janus asked. Moggy nodded. They've been there for about an hour. Janus racked his brain. The hostages had weapons. Sending people in to contain them would be too dangerous. It could get someone hurt. However, these hostages weren't trained agents. It was more than likely that they wouldn't shoot anyone even if they had the means. Moggy. Yeah? Send out a mass text. Tell everyone in the building to get down here wearing any bulletproof things they have. Moggy dug her phone out of her pocket. Sure thing, boss. Virgil stared around the hallway as DW led them to her office. Unlike yesterday, there were people running about, talking and laughing with each other. Not a single hallway was left devoid of people. "Why are there so many people here today?" Roman asked, as if he was thinking the same thing. "Yesterday was Monday," DW said. "Work picks up more on Mondays, so people were busy. Besides, there's an issue going on in one of the lower floors, so some people can't do their jobs right now." "What are their jobs?" Remus asked, raising an eyebrow in suspicion. DW gave him a smile. "That's not important, hon." She stopped in front of a door and reached out to open it. "We're just gonna chill out here and wait for Janus to be done with his stuff." Virgil and the twins followed her into the room as soon as she opened the door. It was the office they'd entered the day before, when they had first seen DW waiting behind her desk as guards dragged them in to see her and Mr. Chimera. Roman and Remus hurried into the office. Roman launched himself onto the couch, and Remus followed right behind. DW strode to her desk and set out her briefcase. "I can open up Jan's office if you kids want back and do your pillow fort," she offered. Roman sat bolt upright. "Could you?" Virgil caught the smile on DW's face as she walked over to the door that led to Mr. Chimera's office. She unlocked the door and pushed it open. "Go have fun." Roman and Remus scrambled off the couch and ran for the door. They disappeared inside and flicked the lights on. DW turned back to her desk. Her gaze fell on the book Virgil had left there the day before. "Oh, kid, you could have taken this home. I don't mind." Virgil gripped the strips of his backpack, still trying to keep himself from stimming. "I didn't know. I thought I'd leave it just in case." DW picked up the book and held it out. "You can keep reading it if you want." Virgil hesitated. He felt like he was being a bother, but he shuffled over to the desk and took the book from her hands. "Thank you." "No prob." DW sat down at her desk and opened her briefcase. Virgil hurried back over to the couch and sat down. Setting his backpack aside, he flopped down onto the cushions and flipped through the book, trying to remember what page he'd left off on. However, he couldn't stop thinking about the short conversation Mr. Chimera and DW had in the elevator. What was this about hostages? Virgil tried to push that out of his mind and focus on Fahrenheit 451. However, he hardly got through a sentence before he heard DW push her chair back and stand up. "Sorry, kids, I gotta go. Jan needs help downstairs." She rummaged around in her desk, and Virgil's heart rate skyrocketed when she brought out a knife. She walked to the door, knife in hand. "I'll be back. Don't wreck anything while I'm gone." She left the office. Virgil stared after her, book forgotten in his hands. What was she doing? Was this related to the hostage thing they'd been talking about in the elevator? He glanced at the door to Mr. Chimera's office. He heard Roman and Remus playing in their fort. While he was extremely wary of the thought of leaving them alone in this place, he was so curious to know what was going on with Mr. Chimera. This was just going to bother him if he didn't check anything out. He set the book down and poked his head into Mr. Chimera's office. "Hey, I'm gonna go out. You guys stay here, okay?" Remus peeked out of the fort. "Why are you going?" Virgil tried to think of something that would make sense. "I'm gonna go find the staff room to see what they might have for snacks. We're gonna be here all morning, so I just want to see if they've got anything for us to eat later. I'll be right back." "See if they have peanut butter," Roman called from within the mess of blankets and pillows. "Will do." Virgil turned around and made his way across the room. He glanced at the couch. He was tempted to bring his backpack with him, but he didn't want to lug it around with him while he was trying to figure out what Mr. Chimera and DW were doing. He stepped out of DW's office and peeked around. A hallway stretched to either side, and another was right in front of him. He was pretty sure the hallway ahead led to the elevator, so he started down it. Most of the people that had been around weren't there anymore, but the few that were present all headed in the same direction, toward the elevator. He got a couple confused glances from people decked out in weapons. He saw one guy with a metal bat slung over his shoulder, but most saw the black and yellow snake pin on his hoodie and paid him no mind. Pretty much everyone reached the elevator before him, which was fine by him. Being stuck in an elevator with people he barely knew was a nightmare for him, so if everyone was already where they needed to be, he could go where he needed without being questioned or judged. He reached the elevator. No one seemed to be around, so he pushed the down button. He waited as the doors opened, and as soon as he saw nobody was in the elevator, he stepped in. He turned to face the buttons for the floors. He hadn't gotten to examine the buttons earlier, but now he was surprised to see that there were at least 15 floors below the bank. What kind of company required that many floors below the main building? A shady illegal one, he reminded himself. Janus Chimera was involved in things that did not adhere to legal or moral standards. Virgil scoffed. How had he almost forgotten that? He was pretty sure Mr. Chimera had said something about the 7th floor down, so he pressed the 7. The elevator shifted, and his stomach turned as it went down. He wasn't really sure why he wanted to see what was going on so much. Normally he would stay out of this kind of thing, but he guessed he just wanted to see how bad Chimera was. How immoral was Janus Chimera? Why was he keeping hostages? The doors opened. Virgil stepped out and peered around. He was in another hallway that went off to the left and right, and another led directly in front of him. He saw nothing on the left, but on the right was a large cluster of people. Almost all of them wielded a weapon of some sort. They were mostly silent, but one voice rang out above the silence. "This isn't the first time a hostage has tried to escape through unconventional means," Mr. Chimera said, "and I doubt it will be the last. However, they have weapons now. We need to overpower them and try not to die." Virgil furrowed his brow. Hostages. So they were keeping people hostage down here. Why? Who were they keeping down here? Mr. Minder said they weren't involved in human trafficking, but what if that was a lie? Virgil started down the left hall, away from Chimera and his group. He needed to know what exactly was going on here. He ducked down the hallway. It was empty, fortunately. He stopped at the end and peered around the corner. It didn't look like there was anyone in his way. He rushed down the corridor, glancing around for someone or something that might provide him with answers. There was nothing in sight, just an empty hall. He passed by openings to halls, glancing down each one to see if there was anything important. Virgil continued on his path, still keeping an eye out for any people that might be held hostage down here. Virgil couldn't believe Dad would leave them with someone who did such a horrible thing as to kidnap people, if that really was the case here. He reached the end of the hallway. A door stood in the wall, and with a moment's hesitation, he reached out and grabbed the handle. He didn't know what was beyond this door, or if there would be anything helpful or informative at all behind it, but he might as well check. He hesitantly opened the door a crack. He peeked through. When he saw nothing but a wall to the side, he opened it more to see what was inside. He heard a click close to his head and froze. "Ready to let us out?" a voice asked. Virgil's heart thudded in his ears like a bass drum. He looked up to see the muzzle of a gun pointed right at his head through the open door. He suddenly regretted coming down here. Thank you all so much for listening. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe so you don't miss the rest of this series. If you like what I hear and you want to read more, you can find the link to the fic and the author in the description. If you want to check out other podfics I've done, you can click on the playlist linked on the screen. See you next time!